Okay, everybody, welcome aboard. We we just changed rooms here. I hope that it's going to be okay in terms of the echo effect that's going on. If this is too annoying, maybe you can type into the chat bar here, and we'll go next door. But in the meantime, everybody's microphones have been muted so that we have a chance to listen to Owen. He'll talk for the next 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A, again, which will be facilitated through the chat box on the control panel of the webinar. This is part of our monthly Cult Enlightenment series. This month, we are diving into the cannabis industry and specifically some work that Owen has done within the CBD category. I'm super excited about what is happening in the cannabis space. I refer to it as one of the big three things happening within cannabis, things happening within crypto and blockchain, and things happening within the demise of the traditional workforce. Is just generating billions and billions of dollars, but it's generating billions of dollars in industries that aren't quite sure how to best engage audiences, exploit the opportunities, because it's just sort of the Wild West. There's a lot of, it's impossible to have best practices per se because the industries are too new, but there are certainly some observations of winners and losers that Owen can share with us. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to get to know Owen, Owen has been a cult engagement engineer for many years. He's sort of one of our senior strategists that goes in to help clients solve tough problems. And for the past couple of years, he's spent a disproportionate amount of his time working with some of our cannabis clients. These are clients that are sort of on the bleeding edge of what's happening within their industry, within the country, Canada, that's on the bleeding edge of what's happening around the world. And so he has become a bit of an expert in a short amount of time, just given the, out of necessity. Our clients have to have place some smart bets and do some smart things, and they've asked Owen for help and counsel to do so. So it's a treat to have him here today. We'll turn it over to Owen, and I'll be back with you at the conclusion of his remarks to help answer some questions.
Thank you, Chris. And good afternoon, everybody in the webinar. So as Chris mentioned, I've been working in advising organizations inside of the cannabis space for a relatively short period of time compared to how long some of you may have been working in the space, about 2 years now. And I endeavor to help people understand the nature of the audiences that they're trying to reach in both recreational product categories as well as CBD-based natural health products. And over the past several months, as this industry has picked up steam with the re-regulation of cannabis as a whole in Canada, and with the passing of the Farm Bill in the US, along with heightened speculation of the opportunity that cannabis and CBD in particular represent on a global scale, I have been alarmed by the approach that brands in this space are taking in order to generate revenue. An approach that, by and large, I believe is short-sighted and has the potential to destroy the total opportunity of the CBD market years down the road. Today, I intend to explain why I think that that is the outcome of the path that the industry is on. And I want to provide some suggestions for what we as leaders within the industry should do about it. Some statistics show the global market value of CBD reaching as high as $20 billion by 2020. And others describe the estimates as low as $1.8 billion in the US by 2022. Overall, there's just a lot of speculation and very little consensus around just how great the opportunity is for CBD-based products around the world. But numbers like these are responsible in some part for the fervor and anticipation that surrounds the industry. You know, a brand new industry set to change the world, unlock human potential, unprecedented healing, and it's going to make me rich. that kind of sentiment has been propagated over and over for probably the last 12 to 18 months. But the vast difference between these two estimates begs the question, who are we supposed to believe, and just how big is the opportunity? I believe that if this happens, it's only because the people in the industry, and frankly, the people in this webinar, and others just like us around the world, screwed it up. As we work to understand the true and full nature of the opportunity represented by the deregulation and the mainstreaming of CBD, through analyzing the pioneers in the space, digesting the medical journal articles, and studying the consumer mindsets that drive adoption and advocacy, I've come to believe that the highest estimates of global market value should be conservative. But it will require the major influencers in this space to adjust course as they bring their products to market. Here's the thing. The mindset that generated the current conservative estimates of the CBD opportunity represent the same kind of thinking that I have observed on trade show floors and on websites and on shelves and on marketing material and packaging from some of the earliest brands in this space. It's a mindset that I propose is set to unlock just 10% of what the total opportunity might be. In order to understand this so-called limiting mindset, we need to understand where it comes from. The pioneers that in many ways have made it possible for this industry to even exist by advocating for the benefits of the ingredient, by lobbying for the end of prohibition, and by keeping the plants alive and diverse while it was still illegal to do so for the past 100 years. To this group, that group of pioneers, the people that, and some of the people that run the most sophisticated gray market companies in the industry, or the people that who have successfully transitioned their businesses to the white market or have joined forces with LPs around the world, frankly, even including the first wave of customers, those innovators on the adoption curve, to those people, CBD is a miracle molecule. It doesn't need to be made sexier, and people shouldn't require convincing of its benefits. To that group, it's entirely obvious. Ultimately, to them, CBD is the value proposition. Now, two things here are critical to understand. Firstly, the belief in CBD's wide-ranging health benefits are not shared by the majority of the market. The majority of the market, frankly, is skeptical and uneducated, and we're going to get into this a little bit later. But secondly, centering the value conversation around CBD itself forces brands to attempt to differentiate through their proprietary extraction methods or their product purity, or even worse, through their price. In the end, there are four primary consequences to this limiting mindset. The first one being slower consumer adoption, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but that adoption is likely going to be driven through education. The second one is a more rapid shift towards commoditization as organizations are forced to compete on price alone. And the third one, it's ultimately going to produce a lower short-term market value. The fourth consequence is demonstrated very well by another ingredient that bears examination. When omega-3 first hit the market in the early 90s, it came with many of the same promises that CBD now carries. Heart health, eye health, brain health, reduction in anxiety. And the market focused the conversation on the ingredient itself largely through education. But consumers are apathetic about potential health benefits. They don't care about brain health. very few of them even understand what brain health is. And the benefits that come from omega-3 are very difficult to pinpoint in the experience of a user. And that sort of perfect storm created a level of apathy, despite a pervasive belief in the benefits of the ingredients. In other words, everyone believes that omega-3 is good for you, and nobody cares. This is the fourth outcome of the limiting mindset: apathy. And it allows for a path for major incumbent brands, the P&Gs and et cetera of the world, to take their cereals or their baby shampoos, or for people to take their eggs and to differentiate themselves from their competition by adding CBD to their products. But this approach provides almost no path for CBD brands like those on this webinar to be able to differentiate themselves in any meaningful way. Now, in terms of the industry as a whole, maybe it's not such a bad thing. Look at omega-3. Omega-3 demonstrates the results of essentially embracing the limiting mindset that I'm discussing today. And frankly, they're not bad. Right now, omega-3 sales globally are somewhere between $30 and $40 billion annually. And they're enjoying a steady 6% compound annual growth rate, some 30 years into their process. This is the slow and steady grind that comes along with trying to drive the adoption of a commodity through education. Certainly, we could all be content with that market value years and years down the line, but could we be satisfied with the speed at which we reach it? I think that there's another path, and this path I call the growth mindset. And I'm going to explain what it is and how we might embrace it for our benefit and, frankly, for the benefit of the entire industry. It involves a series of paradigm shifts that we need to examine that will alter the way that we make decisions as organizations. And the first paradigm shift that's required in order to unlock the true potential of this industry is to reach beyond the obvious early adopters and find ways to allow your products to gain relevance with the skeptical, the ignorant, and the opposed. By understanding the prevailing mindsets at play, brands can make intentional decisions on how to position themselves and their products in such a way that raises CBD above a commodity. Now, there are several studies that have been conducted that segment consumers or users, current users of CBD by classical demographics. One of them is shown here. You can see a split between genders, some insight into how CBD is being used, whether it's for general wellness or for a specific medical condition, and a rough distribution of the age of those who are using it. And frankly, as you get into sort of the 35-year and older range there, the statistical significance of the difference between this and general population is not really enough to bear putting it into a separate chart. Here's the thing, that while demographic information around current users might be helpful to give organizational leaders a helpful hint at what near-term adoption might look like, it isn't at all helpful to predict what the future state of the market might be 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, particularly in an industry that's developing as fast as this one. In order to have an understanding of where the market might go in the future, one actually has to dive into an analysis of the prevailing mindsets or psychographics that exist towards CBD as a whole and exist towards specific applications of the ingredient. Our firm did a detailed analysis and segmentation by psychographics in order to establish an overall distribution of the audience relative to the existing feelings and beliefs towards CBD. We uncovered along the way what kinds of things might influence use or conversion, and what sort of use cases are most strongly applicable to each group. Our research indicated that two variables in particular could be applied that allowed for a fairly uniform distribution of the audience. And the first and probably most obvious variable is that of awareness. How aware is the audience of CBD? How aware are they of the distinction between CBD and cannabis? And finally, how aware are they of the potential health benefits associated with the ingredient? And it needs to be understood that for the time being, at least, in the current state of maturity that the market is in, CBD and cannabis are inexorably linked in the mindset of the majority of the general population. For an ignorant or uneducated consumer, CBD is not yet distinct enough from cannabis to merit a unique place in their mind. In other words, whether we like it or not, CBD carries with it to the market much of the baggage that cannabis has carried from over 100 years of prohibition, the televised war on drugs, and the stoner persona. Therefore, it's critical to overlay the levels of awareness of CBD with a second spectrum that people can be plotted against: the degree of cultural openness towards cannabis. And this spectrum plotted in another fairly uniform distribution amongst people, and it frankly correlated reasonably well with the first factor of awareness. The resulting psychographic segmentation provides us with a starting point for how we might look at the potential marketplace and better understand how these audiences might approach the subject of CBD. Critical to understanding the prediction of the value of the CBD market on a global scale is the fact that these segments that represent people with relatively high awareness and relatively high cultural openness make up just 35 to 40% of the general population, while the majority of the population demonstrates significantly lower levels of awareness and significantly lower levels of cultural openness towards CBD. The highlighted audience there, the opportunity audience, we tend to call the uninitiated, those who have been uninitiated into understanding the benefits of CBD and the distinction from cannabis. That group is a highly skeptical audience, and they're not likely to be found in expos or on trade show floors or even in dispensaries. They operate by a completely different set of rules than the pioneers that have started this trend, and they're influenced by a very different set of sources than most of the people who are making up the market right now. They also represent what we would describe as the prize to be won here, the biggest opportunity. One that if the industry is able to penetrate, more than makes up for the vast disparity between the predictions in global market potential. Organizations in the cannabis space then are faced with a decision. Do I, as a brand leader or an organizational leader, embrace the limiting mindset and try to fuel adoption and customer acquisition through education? Or do I grow my business by trying to drive social change and secure consumers way further down the adoption curve than I am right now? In other words, do I need to move the needle on awareness or openness? When we first conducted this research, I think I was disappointed to understand how closely tied CBD was or is to cannabis. And I was even frustrated with some of the brands that were very loudly reinforcing the association of CBD to cannabis with imagery like what's on the screen right now. And this is, I don't know if anybody from Joe's is on the call today. This is not a shot across the bow at you. Initially, I was was disappointed and frustrated with brands that approached it this way, and or with color palettes derived from the Jamaican flag and things like that. I have since changed my mind on that front, and here's why. Contentious categories rely on social change in order to achieve growth. People actually have to change their long-held beliefs, and in this case, the belief is that cannabis is evil and should be avoided at all costs. People actually have to change their long-held beliefs in order to become a consumer. But contentious categories tend to grow far differently than non-contentious ones. Let's take a look at some examples of contentious social change in recent years. This is a study by Alex Tribou and Keith Collins for Bloomberg, and it demonstrates how socially contentious issues are adopted into the mainstream point of view in the US. And they're actually studying the increasing rate of change that we've seen in recent years from other contentious issues earlier in the country's history. This graph illustrates the number of states that legalized same-sex marriage over the last 15 years. At the time, that was a very highly contentious issue in the United States and elsewhere, but the speed of social change when it happened at an exponential rate. Here's another one that demonstrates the pace of change for women's suffrage from 1890 to 1920. Again, slow start, but exponential change, not linear. Remember this chart? The nice red line of 6.6 compound annual growth rate. That's the pace of grinding out awareness and education in the non-contentious category. Now, what if somebody were to arbitrarily place those lines of best fit against the same arbitrary scale? Please don't leave. I'm trying to prove a point here. And this is it. The limiting mindset, the mindset that fuels the most conservative market estimates, views CBD as a commodity already and views it as a standalone value proposition. One that if people simply heard, they would jump to buy. But we know that's not true. Brands who embrace the growth mindset will strive to create real connections with customers that are far further down the adoption curve than their competition. In fact, if CBD products are positioned appropriately for audiences later down the adoption curve, organizations can actually help spur the social change and ride that wave to greater market share, to higher levels of affinity, higher levels of advocacy, and an altogether more sustainable competitive advantage against those that ignore this kind of message and decide to embrace the commoditization of CBD. When faced with the option of the green curve or the red line, I think everyone in this webinar would agree that we should be approaching our brand, our product, our organizational development with the growth mindset. One more example for you, particularly in contentious categories. Brands that do a good job of connecting with audiences further down the adoption curve than their peers are known to surge past everyone that they are competing against. So what do we need to do? What do we as an industry need to do, I should say, in order to encourage social change and to start to penetrate this skeptical audience? There are several things that organizations in this industry need to pay attention to. And the first one, and arguably the most important one, is the claims that we make. You don't have to look very far in this industry to find a CBD product claim that an independent panel of physicians would be likely to oppose. Some of my favorite stated or implied claims that I've come across over the last couple of years for CBD's far-reaching health benefits are a claim as a treatment for AIDS and HIV, claim as a treatment for ALS. Obviously, we've all seen a claim for treatment of cancer. And probably my favorite is a treatment for mad cow disease. Now, I am not a doctor, full disclosure, but I am a marketer who cut his teeth in Canada, a country with an extremely strict regulatory framework for product claims, and similarly austere advertising regulations for any brand in the cannabis space. And I'm willing to bet that none of those claims would be permissible in the sale of CBD where I come from. I believe in a lot of the hype that surrounds CBD, and I'm excited by the prospect of broader adoption of the compound into people's daily regimen. And I think that seeking natural alternatives to harmful synthetic pharmaceuticals that are currently being prescribed like candy in North America, it's generally a good idea. But I also believe that CBD has its limitations. It is a remarkable molecule from a remarkable plant, no doubt about that. But it is not a cure-all. Who cares though, right? Say whatever you want. Well, let me explain why we should care. The reason why we should all care has to do with the adoption from that mainstream audience, that opportunity audience that's both skeptical, ignorant, and confused about what to believe when it comes to CBD. An audience that's looking for any reason to declare CBD a fad at best and snake oil at worst. This is an audience that relies on the opinions from credible medical professionals before making a purchase decision. Obviously, those doctors need to be persuaded as much as the uninitiated audience does. And the more of these forms of CBD mythology that are propagated, the more skeptical these doctors and pharmacists become. It is in the industry's best interests to stay above reproach when it comes to claims, whether we're implying them or stating them on our products and our packaging and in our marketing materials, in order to create more and more passionate and influential advocates. And I'm going to get into this in a moment, but you have to remember that omega-3, a molecule that was well substantiated for its health benefits, but provided very little meaningful or recognizable difference in somebody's day-to-day life, bred apathy in the marketplace. But if we go around trying to propagate mythology that has zero substantiation and zero positive effect on somebody's well-being, we stand the chance to actually turn an audience around from being an advocate to an enemy of our industry. So we need to be very careful here. Our studies have indicated that the uninitiated audience are more than twice as likely to trial a CBD-based product when it has claims that are aligned to specific symptoms or conditions that they're familiar with. And this is awesome. This is excellent for the industry. It gives us hope for moving further down the adoption curve, but only when CBD actually has efficacy in that area, less so when the claims are based around mythology. The levels of hype that people are seeing around CBD are astronomical, and the most skeptical of the uninitiated, for that group, CBD basically has one shot. It either works or it doesn't. They're ready to reject every claim about the molecule if only one claim is proven to be false. And so it falls on us as market leaders to uphold a higher standard as an industry in the claims that we make or imply around our products. It also falls to us to help to support and to push forward further medical research in this area in order to arm physicians with real data to rely on so that they can recommend natural alternatives to the commercially mainstream solutions that this audience is currently relying on. The second factor that puts risk on the total market opportunity also puts a risk on each and every one of the organizations that are represented here today. And that is the rapid commoditization of CBD. At the end of the day, we are talking about marketing a molecule, something that everyone here has access to, something that is difficult, if not impossible, to patent, and something that's relatively uniform across each and every one of your businesses, you being people attending today. And I will admit, commoditization seems like somewhat of an inevitability in the space. In fact, some of the work that I've been doing puts the timeline for that in the 2 to 3 years time range. But I do believe that we have an impact on the speed at which we reach that commoditization as a group. While there is little that one of us or two of us can do, if we all behave in the right manner here and start pushing the adoption of this kind of molecule or these kinds of products further down the adoption curve, we can slow the pace down. One of the ways to do that is by avoiding general claims of benefit. Some of the most general claims on the opposite side from the mythology are CBD as a sleep aid, CBD for general relaxation, CBD for general inflammation relief. Some of these claims are so vague that the uninitiated user would likely not notice a difference or a benefit from adopting it. And when it comes to making a statement of efficacy around CBD for the uninitiated market, it's best to avoid those vague claims of general health unless we want to start moving the way that omega-3 has. Even when general consensus from trusted medical professionals falls on the side of CBD having overarching health benefits, the approach of CBD as a daily supplement will tend to increase the rate towards at which the industry proceeds towards commoditization. So as you position products towards the mass market, try to avoid general or generic claims of benefit and try to zone in on the specific needs of the audience. If you associate your products with the specific relief of a specific symptom where the benefits are noticeable, now you can start to create ammunition for advocates. The final red flag for the skeptical majority of the marketplace has to do with linguistics and brand. And aside from the wild and spurious claims that are being made around CBD in the broader market, there is another problem, and that is how brands communicate and attempt to differentiate themselves from each other. If you want to move further down the adoption curve, you have to reduce the level of cultural association that CBD has with cannabis. So this includes language and visuals. This includes logo marks with cannabis leaves and color palettes that are derived from the Jamaican flag and all those kinds of things. That kind of marketing serves to reinforce the cultural association that exists and strengthens the influence of the baggage that CBD already has to shoulder. So if you want to proceed down the adoption curve, please do so by positioning for the audience, not for the history of the product. And another point on this topic is decredentializing language. There's another trend that I've noticed, and that is that brands are starting to try to use language that's presumably meant to credentialize themselves and the ingredient, language like increasing bioavailability and nano-emulsification and things like that. And I recognize that these are real terms and it's not actually pseudoscience, but what's happening is that in an effort to try to make CBD sound serious, some brands are reinforcing the stigma of snake oil, and they're coming across sounding like multi-level marketing firms. This kind of language is really a red flag for the uninitiated. And this opportunity audience is already looking for any reason they can have to reject the hype around CBD. So as a general rule of thumb, if you don't see Advil, Tylenol, or Aleve using terms like bioavailability or nano-emulsification in their marketing materials, you probably should avoid using them as well. The last sort of paradigm shift that I would encourage marketers to make as they attempt to move further down the adoption curve has to do with the question around who we're competing against. If we as an industry decide to embrace the full opportunity that's sitting ahead of us over the next 4 to 5 years, we need to do it differently than we are right now. Our goal should not be to compete against each other by skirting claims or differentiating ourselves through some form of proprietary delivery format or extraction method. The vast majority of the opportunity doesn't even care about that. Our goal should be to find the richest opportunities where CBD has the potential to unseat an incumbent synthetic solution and to go to battle with them. But winning that battle, as opposed to the battle with each other, is going to require that the entire industry holds the bar higher than it does right now. So that means no more making erroneous claims, no more applying pseudoscience to our delivery formats, no more cannabis culture being infused into our brands, and no more over-promising on the benefits of CBD just to make a sale. We all have a responsibility to support real research so that real doctors can support real claims. We need to work hard as an industry to create advocates for the ingredient by ensuring that the very first experience that a new patient has is positive and meaningful. And we need to ensure that our competition amongst one another doesn't result in the rapid commoditization of CBD through apathy. I recognize that I come across as a bit of a naysayer sometimes when I deliver this message to audiences. But I want to make something clear. I, for one, fall into the converted side of the spectrum when it comes to CBD. I truly believe that this compound that has been sitting under our noses for so long and guarded away via prohibition has the potential to truly change the way that people live and allow for people to have a more fulsome life experience free from the bondage of opioids and other synthetic pharmaceuticals. Theoretical figures around total market size are meaningless in an industry with as many players as this one. But together, we should be thinking about that number as one common or shared KPI that each and every one of us should strive to outperform. Together, we as industry leaders have the power to make decisions to not only generate a profit for ourselves and our shareholders, but to unseat many incumbent pharmaceutical companies and to improve the lives of millions of people that are with a truly democratized and completely natural ingredient. If you want to reap the benefits of the growth mindset, you need to zig where others zag. You need to stop focusing on differentiating yourself from other CBD brands and start focusing on really connecting with new audiences. I would urge you all to think as you bring your brands to market, not just about how to reach the lowest hanging fruit in the market, but how to reach the highest hanging fruit, the most difficult fruit to reach, and to build products and build a brand for them. That's how your organization and ultimately the rest of the world will benefit the most from this remarkable molecule. Thank you.
This is us giving you a standing ovation. Well done, Owen, and thank you for, I think it's not only provocative content, but I personally really appreciate it. I don't know how many cannabis experts are connecting the dots between women's suffrage and or same-sex marriage and cannabis, but I think you did so masterfully to help demonstrate this is as much a social movement as it is a product category, and therefore we should be movement makers, maybe more so than marketers, which is actually a question I want to dive into. But for those of you who are on the phone, there's a chat box. Maybe you guys, Michelle, you could type in a question, make sure I'm seeing them appropriately, and I'll read your questions out for the benefit of those who want to stay with us, and we'll maybe just take 5 or 6 minutes here and let everybody get back to their day. Owen, half of what I was hearing you say in a far more eloquent and politically correct way is that CBD and maybe cannabis marketers at large aren't really using the right marketing playbook. And I'm wondering, is that because are these companies being filled with traditional CPG marketers or pharma marketers or maybe even alcohol marketers, and they're trying to apply the lessons from those industries? Or why do you think that they're already off on the wrong foot in terms of how they go to market?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I've seen a lot of evidence of marketers in the space trying to find ways to skirt the system or work around the regulations that are in place for from an advertising perspective. I think it has more to do with marketers being sort of lazy and trying to compete with each other for the easiest elements of the target market. And what we're seeing at this point is an extremely high density of brands that are positioned for just the first like 15% of that adoption curve. And that actually makes me nervous for the future of the industry, because I think, you know, we're concentrating far too much on the innovators and early adopters, and we're not actually trying to put the legwork in to develop a real connection with anybody further down the curve.
But is that just out of necessity? Don't you have to get the early adopters first? And I'm imagining these are bootstrapped companies that are trying to demonstrate some traction. So like, what would be the percentage that they should spend on the here and now versus building a brand for the future?
I think it's probably difficult for a brand, just because of how polarized the opinions are between the segments I discussed today. It's probably difficult for a single brand to approach more than one of those segments at the same time. And so I think the answer is actually probably found in product line architectures, or not product line architectures, but brand architectures within people's organizations. And so how much should they be spending or investing on getting down the curve? I think at this point, it would be wise to invest at least half of what, at least half of the total budget, both on the product development side and on the marketing side, to try to move further down that curve.
I think one of the other things that hopefully was a bit eye-opening for the audience here was the linkage between CBD and cannabis, because I know a lot of companies certainly thought they could avoid a lot of the legislative and psychological concerns about cannabis just by going into CBD, which is less regulated. But I think I'm hearing you say we can't, that there are, we're duty bound, that these things are inextricably linked, at least for the short term. So should a CBD marketer be having an opinion or a voice about cannabis's adoption and the pros and cons of the other aspects, the THC aspects of cannabis, even though that's not what their product does?
I think we can allow the change to happen. I think that for organizations that are focused on the recreational side of things, or even on the medical side of things, obviously what I was talking about today is very natural health focused, but those on the rec side are, I think, going to help out of self-preservation move the social change along. My recommendation for brands that are trying to proceed further down the line on the natural health side is to try to gently distance yourself from CBD. Stop treating CBD as a standalone value proposition, and stop trying to reinforce the, if you want to gain a share with that audience, stop trying to reinforce the sort of culture or stigma around cannabis for the past 100 years. And I would allow the rest of the industry, those who are playing on the rec side, to do their job of pushing that social adoption and change, along with the regulators and the lobbyers and whatnot. So it's almost a situation where you need to trust that the change is going to happen, and respond to what the target audience that you're trying to achieve affinity with requires.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions here. You shared a slide on exponential growth using Juul and sort of the cigarette industry as an example. How much do you think Juul's success is attributed to following some of the recommendations that you've given us here today, or is that too different? They're just, you use them because they're demonstrable of what exponential looks like, but their playbook could not apply?
No, that's a good question. Juul, I showed the example of Juul because it comes from a contentious category as well. But the unique thing that Juul did differently than their mediocre peers did was they weren't trying to attract vapors. They weren't trying to attract people who vape to buy their product. They were trying to attach themselves as a brand to a group of non-existent consumers at the time, and recognized that there was some contention in the space and behaved appropriately, used a cult branding, cult marketing playbook to spur not only adoption or steal market share from existing users, but to spur adoption and actually sort of make good on their mission, which was to eradicate combustible cigarettes from our society. So as their curve and their market share has grown, it had in some part to do with their ability to affect real change as well. So I think both the fact that it's a contentious category as well as the fact that they were thinking differently from the rest of the marketplace, and then they employed a cult brand playbook would be how I would attribute their success.
Last one here is, give a general opinion, Owen, sort of in regards to importing CBD products into either Canada or the US. And there's a note here, more of a SKD 1 class still. I don't know if that entirely makes sense to you, but is there a difference in your mind between whether it's homegrown or brought in from brands or providers outside of the country?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is will answer the question, but I'll give it a shot. Right now, the value proposition of locally grown is only really relevant to about somewhere between 8 and 15% of the market, our research shows. So things like locally grown, things like craft grown and things like that, or craft produced, whether it's CBD or cannabis for that matter, is only really relevant to a small portion of the marketplace. And then, so in terms of where it comes from, it probably has less impact at this point. I will say that sort of the next easiest to reach fruit, this group that's very focused on natural alternatives to synthetic pharmaceuticals, they will care about sourcing, not necessarily that it's local, but that it's probably organic or of a certain quality and that kind of thing. So it's something to be mindful of, but as you move further down the adoption curve into this key opportunity audience, they're going to care less about the nuts and bolts and more about what your brand stands for and what kind of net end benefit you can provide to them.
That's great. Thank you, Owen. It looks like we're at our appointed hour, so we'll bid everybody a fond adieu that took time for joining us, and we'll be sending out some details on the Enlightenment series for the month of May, as well as anybody that's interested in some of the speaker notes from today can email Michelle, and we can send you a copy. Thank you. Have a good one.